Hello, everybody. Welcome back to JavaScript Marathon, week 3. So glad that all of you have been here. If you have been here for all 3 weeks so far, especially of this React track, why don't you say hi, give yourself a little pat on the back in the chat there, because you will get the special treat, because you will get sort of the conclusion of this epic trilogy. And I promise you it'll be even better than Rise of Skywalker. But let's dive into things and we'll talk about what we're talking about today. We're talking about Netlify. We're going to be talking about Netlify, how we deploy React projects and Gatsby projects to Netlify, realistically anything to Netlify. But we're going to be talking and going through some of that today to show you how easy it is to get your sites live. My name is Rob Ocel. I'm a software architect at this.labs. If you want to reach out to me after this or during this, you can reach me on Twitter at robocel. So it's just my name with an extra L. I think I've told the story too many times on why that's true, but there it is. So at robocel, if you'd like to reach out to me later on Twitter. Of course, we couldn't do this JavaScript marathon without our sponsors. So our first sponsor today is this.labs, your partners in modern digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. Find out more at this.labs.com or send us an email at hi@this.co. Do you find keeping up with the constantly evolving technologies a struggle? Do you want to bring your team up to speed on any of the latest technologies? This.labs offers personalized training programs, like this one, to suit your organizational needs, ensuring you and your company stay on the leading edge. Contact us today at hi@this.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. I also just want to bring people's attention to some upcoming events that we have. And I know this is the React track of JavaScript Marathon, and I'm starting with Angular, but my OCD just meant I had to do this in week order. So we do these weekly on Thursdays. The first Thursday of every month is Angular Meetup. And if you're interested in that and wanting to learn a little bit more about Angular, you can find that at angularmeetup.com. Every second Thursday of the month is the React Meetup, which we just had, I believe, last week. And so hopefully a few of you were able to attend that and enjoyed yourselves. If not, we'll have it every month, on the second Thursday. And you can sign up for that at reactjsmeetup.com. And finally, we have the Vue meetup every third Thursday, which is actually this Thursday. And it's a special treat this week because we're actually doing the state of Vue.js with the creator of Vue.js, Evan You, and Torsten Lundberg. So if you're interested in that, or if you've been meaning to check out Vue, or you just kind of want to see what's going on, and based on what you've heard, please check that out. You can find that link at vuemeetup.com. And finally, our next sponsor is Fauna. FaunaDB, the database built for serverless, featuring native GraphQL. Add a full-featured global data store to your apps in minutes. Access effortlessly from the browser and from mobile. Never again worry about data correctness, capacity, redundancy, latency, or availability. Today, they're actually offering you a generous free tier, so give it a try. And you can try it at the link below, bit.ly/Fauna free tier. Okay, so today, as I said, we're talking about Netlify, and we're talking about a lot of different things under this general umbrella. But this idea is about getting our code to production, getting our code into people's web browsers so that with addresses and URLs that they can actually reach it at. This is such an interesting topic, and it hasn't always been easy. I've been around long enough to remember the days when you had to have these sort of log into these sort of bespoke web interfaces, or even use different types of connection protocols to upload zip files to web servers and things like that to get your website deployed. And even more recently, we've had things like Jenkins builds and all sorts of automated build tools and things along those lines. And there's just been a lot of complexity there. To be perfectly honest, it's been something that I just have not enjoyed doing a lot. I love making the sites, but I always sort of zoned out when it came time to actually get them deployed. And I'm hoping that with technology like Netlify and all of its similar partners, things like Firebase, things like Amplify and other things like it, that they are really improving the game for deployment and for getting code out there and getting code into production, continuous integration, continuous deployment. And I hope that when you see this as we build this out together over the next hour, that you get excited about it like I do. So what are today's goals? So what are we actually going to try and do today? So we're going to take our Gatsby page that we were working on last week, and we're going to get that onto the web using Netlify. We're also going to show how to add serverless functions and API support to our site to do things like adding comments to the blog that we created. Then we're going to discuss continuous integration and deployment and integration with GitHub so that you can do version control and just make sure that your code is always getting out into production as you edit it. And if there's some time left over or along the way, we're going to keep talking about this idea of the Jamstack, which is a concept that they use a lot with Netlify, and this whole principle that undergirds kind of the Netlify service offering, and talk about its potential. So for a moment, I'm going to switch how I'm sharing my screen. And as we do this, what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to be transitioning over to my my screen view here so that we can actually start looking at some code. And I'm going to bring things up so that we can remind ourselves what it was we were actually building. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, welcome. We're so glad that you're actually here and that you're joining us on this journey. And so I want to get everybody up to speed. So let's start by going to our terminal. I can make this a little bigger, sorry. Go even a little bit bigger than that. Hopefully that's big enough. If you all are having problems seeing more, just let me know. Okay. All right. So the first thing that we want to do is we built this Gatsby site last week, and so we want to see what it is that we built. So we're going to do Gatsby develop. That's to execute the Gatsby build process in a way that we can see all our changes locally if we were to make edits. And here it's going to build pretty quickly. And then we'll be able to open it up, and we'll see kind of some of the stuff that we were playing with. Now, were we doing earth-shattering things with our Gatsby default? No, we built a pretty basic site. If you recall, we built a blogs section, which listed out a bunch of blogs that we had entered as markdown text. And we could go to any of these blogs and see some information from our markdown, to see some code that we had, and just very basic blog stuff going from markdown to websites. The final thing that we did is we added some dynamic content to our Gatsby site, and we had this sort of dad joke fetcher. So we had this ability to go get dad jokes from the internet. We got those directly from a particular API. So that's where we got last week. We learned about plugins, and we learned about Gatsby, and we learned about all that. But all this development has been local so far. So how do we actually get this to a place where people can run it, where people can see it, where people can give us feedback, where we can actually turn this into a product? Because I think if you're like me, a lot of side projects end up dying before they actually get out to the public so that the people can actually see it. And I think some of the people that get the most traction, that get the most sticky content, are the people that actually take their little pet project and take it out of their local web browser, take it out of their blog post, take it out of their different editing tools, and get that deployed to the web so that people can actually play with it and have fun with it. So let's get started on that journey. So we're going to go back to our terminal. We'll kill Gatsby for now. We don't need it to be running for now. And the first thing that we're going to do to get started, and it's kind of been sort of our rite of passage each of these weeks, is that we want to install the associated CLI. So the first week we were doing create React app and learning React. The second week we were doing the Gatsby CLI, and this week we're going to be doing the Netlify CLI. So the first step that we can do here is to install globally. So I'm going to do npm i-g, which is going to let me do a global installation. And we're going to do npm i-g Netlify CLI. And hopefully this goes quickly for me because I actually already have it installed. But it's going to install that Netlify CLI, which is going to give us access to now Netlify commands from the command line. So one of the things which I'll call out while this is installing is that one of the things that you may or may not have noticed if you were following along with this last week is that when we made the Gatsby project with the Gatsby CLI, it actually initialized a Git repository for us. And in my terminal styling, you can actually see that over to the right, that we actually have an initialized Git repository, and it's set to master. Now, Git is such a cool tool that you don't actually need to be connected to GitHub or GitLab or any website provider of Git services in order to have a Git repository. You can have a Git repository that's purely local, that's not connected to anybody else, but you just want that version control and that ability to have that. So it actually did do that for us. It did create a Git repository for us. We just haven't done anything with it yet, but we're going to see how that's going to be really important to us soon. Okay, so we've installed Netlify, and Netlify is now giving us some options where we can do an init to create a project. So let's take them up on that. But before we do that, let's actually do one additional step, which is to sign in. So what we want to do is we want to log into Netlify so that when we're doing our commands like initializing the Netlify project and later doing all sorts of other operations, that we want it to actually be connected to our actual Netlify account. So what we're going to do is do a Netlify login. And Netlify login is going to open up your web browser, and it's going to ask you for permission to access Netlify. Now, if you've never been on Netlify before, it might even be asking you to sign up here or to sign in. And then you might have some additional steps to go into first. But because I already have an account, it's here asking for permission to allow the CLI to access my account. So I'm going to authorize them. They seem trustworthy enough. And we're going to go back, and we're going to see that we're now logged into our Netlify account from the CLI, which is great. Okay, so the next step is that we want to create the GitHub repository. So this thing that I've been talking about, that we want to have a repository to put our code. So to do that, I'm going to actually go to my GitHub account, and I'm going to create a new repository. So if you go to GitHub or wherever it is that you want to store your code, and you just create a new repository, we're going to make it JavaScript Marathon. Amazingly, that's available. I'm going to call it JavaScript Marathon Netlify, just so in case somebody else wants to make JavaScript Marathon, that they don't have problems. I'm going to make it public, and I'm not going to initialize it with any other information. I'm going to leave it completely empty. Now, because it's completely empty, it actually gives me some additional advice here. It says that we can push an existing repository from the command line using this command. So we're going to take that in our back pocket. And the first thing that we're going to do is notice that there is a lot of files that we haven't checked in that we were editing. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a git add star or dot to add everything. Now if we look, all those files that we've edited or added have been added to the git check-in. So we're going to commit those changes. And now we have our local Git repository is up to date. But remember, this is purely local. It's not connected to anything yet. So to connect it to something, we're actually going to use the commands that GitHub gave us, which is going to add a remote origin to this GitHub repository, or this Git repository, basically telling it that it lives now on GitHub. And then we're going to push to that origin. So we're going to push the code into GitHub. That's basically what's being done here. OK, so there we're done. So now we have connected a GitHub repository. And if we go back over here and we refresh this page, you can now see there's our entire Gatsby site that we have built last week. Okay, so I know this seems like a little bit of initial steps, and you're like, okay, well, where's the Netlify stuff? But so far, we've initialized the Netlify CLI. We've logged into it. We have now set up our GitHub repository. And now it's time to actually set Netlify up in our project. To do that, we're going to do Netlify init. And it's going to give us some options. So let me shrink this window down so that you guys can actually see it kind of on the middle of your screens here. So it's asking us what we want to do. Do we want to connect this to an existing Netlify site, meaning I've already created something using the user interface on the Netlify website, or do I want to create and configure a new site? We're going to create and configure a new site because, especially if you're following along with me, you're not going to have any sites already in your account, and nor do I have one for this. So I need to create a new one. Now, it's going to ask you, because we've logged in, what we want, what site we want to use or what bucket of sites we want to use. Now, because I've logged in and I only have this one account, Rabo Sells Team, I have to use that one. And then I can get a unique name. So here's where I can kind of create a temporary name for me to use until I maybe buy a domain or something like that. But this is going to be kind of something that I can choose so that people can find it. Now, if you're actually giving a project that you want to share with people, I would greatly suggest that if you're not going to buy a custom domain for it, that you give an interesting name here that will help people understand what it is that you're giving them a link to. However, if you don't care and it's just a little side project like it is here, I would 100% recommend that you leave it optional, because then you're going to get random words, and that is just going to give your project so much more character. So in this case, I'm leaving it undefined. So it's going to pick a name for me. And the name that it's picked for me is Wonderful Pain. So our project is going to be Wonderful Pain 0DAE2b.netlify.com. So now it's going to ask us what our build command is. And this allows us to customize whether we're using Yarn or NPM, whether we're using Gatsby or Hugo or whatever tool we're using or CLI we're using to run our build. We can actually input this here. Now, it happens to be the case that if you look at our Gatsby project in our package JSON, well, we would use Gatsby build to build our application. It's actually already initialized in our npm build command. So we're going to actually leverage just that basic npm run build. You don't have to do this. If you want to use Yarn, you can switch in the Yarn version. If you want to use the Gatsby version, you might have some different challenges along the way that we'll discuss later. So I'm sticking with the npm run build because I think this is going to give me the most amount of flexibility to deal with some of the issues we're going to have in the future. Now, the directory to deploy, for us, for Gatsby, this is going to be public. You have to decide what that is for you. It is configurable and it is changeable later. So you don't have to necessarily be 100% on board now, but we're going to do public. Okay. So now what it's doing is it's initializing and it's creating some of the GitHub notification hooks, and it is doing this. So it now gives us this option to do a Netlify open. And Netlify open is going to open up the console for our site. And so here we are. Here's that console. And so now we're looking at actual Netlify. And it's currently building this site, which I think we might expect it to fail here in a little bit, but I'll explain why in a second. But here is our dashboard. This is our Netlify site. So when you actually deploy a site using Netlify, this is what you're going to have access to. Along the top here are all the different features of Netlify that you might eventually use, things like analytics, A/B testing, forms and identity, which are just additional features that they have, functions, which we'll get to. That's going to be how we're going to do some of our APIs and our special functionality, and deploys. So you can see your current deploys and your past deploys. You can see here that there's currently a deploy in progress. And if I want to click into it, I can actually see the text that's flying by on the screen as it's actually doing the installation and the deployment. So when you get error messages, or if you don't, or if you just want to watch the build proceed to see why it's taking so long or what it's stuck on, you can always open up this deployment log to get a full view on everything that's been happening on your current and past deployments. You can manually trigger deployments, but you don't always have to, because Netlify is going to be monitoring your Git repository. We'll be talking about that. It's going to be monitoring your GitHub repository to see anytime that you push changes. And anytime that you push changes to your GitHub repository, it's going to automatically do a deployment. But if your deployments fail and you don't have to make a code change to fix them, you can simply trigger an automatic deploy to override, so you don't have to just push a meaningless code change just to force an automatic deployment. You always have the option to trigger a manual one. We can also look at our deployment settings. So here for now, we have these settings. So it is connected to my GitHub my GitHub page, which it read that right from my Git configuration and my upstream origin. So it pulled that in when I did the Netlify init earlier. And it knows that it needs to run npm run build to actually get my site statically generated. And then it's going to push and it's going to pull everything out of public, and it's going to actually deploy that. Now, when we actually talk about deploying, what does that mean? And what does that mean for Netlify? Well, it's really interesting. This is one of the primary tenets of the Jamstack idea, and what Netlify uses is that it really is expecting you to give it static content, and it's going to take that static content, and it's not like it's going to host it on some sort of web server somewhere where, when users make requests, it's going to generate some special HTML or index page for them live and then send that down. Instead, it's going to basically take your static content and put it directly onto a content delivery network or a CDN that's going to be closer to those users so they get direct access to it. It's really kind of interesting because it gives you a lot of scaling benefits and a lot of performance benefits sort of right out of the box that you can really take advantage of and not have to worry about, where is this information on my web server? Is it on the web server? Is the web server getting slammed? Is it getting a Reddit hug of death because my side project is just that cool? Anything along those lines. So there's a lot of different things that you can look into here as well. Okay, let's tuck on that deployment and see if it actually failed. No, it actually worked, which is great. So if we look, we can preview the deploy, which is going to send us to our actual site. So this is the actual link, the actual URL to our website. And I believe if you all go here, and this is going to be dangerous later when we add comments to the blog, but if you actually go to this website, you're going to have full access to all the features of the website, including exploring all the things that we've talked about previously, like seeing our list of blogs or seeing our dad jokes and so on and so forth. Oh no, dad joke, sorry. Dad joke builder. Okay, so our website is now deployed on the web. This is not local. This is not running off of my machine. This is actually on the web, and probably many of you are actually already looking at these addresses and trying it out. Okay, so let's take a moment and just sort of let that hit us. That we've done a lot already. We've actually already deployed our app, so we're pretty much done, right? Not quite. So here we have this production site, so we are ready to go. So now the point is, what do we want to change? Well, let's look at one other really cool feature of Netlify, which is related to this deployment process and the monitoring of GitHub. Let's actually do something where we make a branch. So let's make a branch off of master, and let's just call it test. And then let's check out test. And then let's go make a code change. So let's go to our blogs. So if you remember in this page section in blogs, this is where we can make some changes. So here we said, please read my blogs. And then we're going to just be snarky, and we're going to say, please definitely do not read my blogs. And we're going to make that change to the text on our website. This would need to be regenerated by Gatsby and redeployed ultimately in the end. Now, if we go back and we look at the files that we've changed, of course, we've changed that one file. We can ignore for the moment the git ignore from earlier. But we will add these two files into this commit on this branch and make sure that that worked. Then we're going to do a commit on this. Oops, not H, but M. Then we're going to push this branch, and it's going to tell me that I need to do this other command, because I usually do this with a user interface. To be perfectly honest, I'm not a Git command line warrior, but I didn't want to bounce between too many windows, so I got just enough commands to be dangerous today. This will get our Git branch up on the web. Okay, so now what can we do with this? Okay. What can we do with this branch? Well, what we can do with this branch is we can go back to our repository, and if we're working on a team, right, we might want people to actually make pull requests. We want to do reviews. We want to see what people are editing. So if we do that, we can make a pull request here, and we're going to go from test to master, and we're going to create that pull request. And when we do this, what we're going to notice is that right away, because Netlify is connected to this GitHub repository, it's actually monitoring for pull requests. And when we make a pull request, it's automatically deploying a preview version of this site. Now, it's not overwriting our production version, but it's going to give us a custom URL that you can actually visit, that anyone can visit on their web browser, that will show what this site will look like if you were to actually deploy it to production. How great is that? That you can actually play with the changes that you've made live, and you can see if somebody's about to make changes that are going to break the build. I hope I didn't break the build, but we'll find out in a moment here. Oh, look at that. Look at that timing. It waited till exactly when I finished talking to finish the build. So I can go to this details, and you see that it's a deploy preview 1 wonderful pane. So this is the address of the site, this wonderful pane, whatever. And then we have deploy preview 1, and that 1 I'm pretty sure is connected to the PR number, but it comes up with its own IDs for it. And if you were to go to this address now, you would actually get this version of the site, which if I go to blogs, says definitely do not read my blogs. And if I remove this preview version and I go to the live version of blogs, it says please read my blogs, right? So I know this might seem simple, and it might seem almost not interesting to talk about, but this is such a powerful tool on teams, especially distributed teams, remote teams, or teams where you want to bring in a designer, a project manager, a product manager, or anybody else for that matter, or customers and show them what you've been working on so that they can give approvals without needing to know how to install an entire development environment or having to have special environments set up specifically for tests where you pull this kind of stuff in. Getting this kind of stuff for free, super, super, super nice. Now, if we go back to our Gatsby site, so this is what I'm talking about. So I was playing around with this to make sure that we had some good examples. And my other ones that I got were Romantic Brown and Happy Oiler. So I just love the random names. So here is our deploys. And if you look, it says it made a preview deployment today or earlier, and that's great. So we can actually get to it from here as well. But if we go to our deploy settings, so our notifications, we go to our notification settings. This is where a lot of that's connected. So by default, it's going to set you up this way. If it connects to your GitHub account, it's going to set you up with some baseline outgoing notifications. So it's going to send a commit status to GitHub when a deploy preview succeeds or fails or starts, right? So that's what was happening. I have these PRs, and it is sending that commit status directly to GitHub to keep that up to date. Now, here's what's really cool is you can set up any additional notifications that you want. You want to integrate with Slack and have it communicate with a particular channel that builds are going off or that builds are failing. Or you can send it to an arbitrary webhook to integrate with any other service that you want to help you monitor this stuff. Of course, sending emails or even making comments on the pull requests themselves, right? You can really customize and adapt the ways that you want to notify the progress and the success of these notifications. You can even, if I'm going in the right place, oh, well, you can do all that. I'm going a little bit off script here with the continuous deployment to see that you can, oh, I lost it now. Where you can actually set it up that it doesn't have to run off of only your master branch. You can actually have Netlify set up to do different things on all your branches. So you can set up a master branch for your production. You can set up a develop branch for like having a test thing. You can do it off of any number of additional branches. You can do it on every commit or every feature branch. You can do it on pull requests. You can really configure the way that that Netlify is going to connect to GitHub and how it's going to generate builds automatically for you in the CI/CD process. It's all through here. And of course, you know, whenever you're live streaming, your eyes suddenly gloss over and you can't see the most obvious thing. So I'm sure I'm missing where it's jutting out at me, telling me to set that stuff up. But there you go. But it's not forced to be on master. It's on master by default, but we can change all of that. All right, so we have a website. We actually got it deployed. We found a way to do pull requests and to make changes in that way. First of all, I'm going to go commit that pull request actually because we need to commit that pull request because it has a git ignore, and I'm actually really nervous that some of the files that Netlify added might suddenly get added to our future Git check-ins if I am not careful. So we are going to merge this. Look at that. Look at the progress we're making in production. Now, actually, what's interesting is this will give us an opportunity to prove that that deploy preview is fine, but that this production one now is building because we've actually merged into master. OK. Now we're going to talk about more than just deployment. So this is the CI/CD, and I hope that you all see how easy this is and you actually are inspired by how straightforward this is. We just connected it to an existing GitHub repository, which is free. We connected it with our Gatsby page that we built already, and that was straightforward. And we got a Netlify account, which is free. At least there is a free tier of the Netlify account. And just by using the CLI and a couple of commands, we actually have all of that connected and we have code in production. But we want to now add the API portion of this because, you know, websites are great if we can do everything with the static content. But of course, we know that we need things like authentication, we need persistence, we need data. All interesting applications sort of come in at that level. And so we're going to start to investigate and see what that is all about. So to do that, we need to start building functions. Now, these are functions. You may have also heard them called serverless functions. You may have also heard of lambdas. They have many different names depending on the provider. I think they might be called Google Cloud Functions and Google and then Azure functions in Azure. I can't remember off the top of my head what Azure calls them, but basically you have this idea that you have these functions which are going to be executed on demand, act as if there is a server that's always on, listening on a certain API port and a certain API address, listening for you to call it to do data. But what it actually is just a piece of code that's going to live in their cloud. And when it's on demand, when it's necessary, it's going to be spun up, initialized from scratch, initialized from nothingness, and then given the data to process, taken the data back out, and move it back out, right? What a cool idea. These little tiny services doing these individualized functions that we can take advantage of, but that don't need a large monolithic server or even a microservice or any kind of infrastructure that I actually have to manage to be effective. I just identify the code that I actually want to execute and maybe the other APIs I want to integrate with, and I let Netlify and whoever else take care of that infrastructure for me. So we're going to go to the site settings here, and we are going to go to the settings, functions. There we go, functions directory. So we're about to set the functions directory. Now, we don't actually have a functions directory yet, but we're about to create one, and we need to let Netlify know where that's going to be. So where we're going to do it is in something called functions. Straightforward enough. And so when we go back to our Netlify, our site that we're working on, our Gatsby site, and we actually start to instantiate these functions, we're going to see that it's going to create this directory for us. Now, we can edit all of our settings, by the way, in Netlify in this web browser, as we're doing now. There's also the possibility that you can version control your settings and manage them entirely through a local file in your repository called the netlify.toml, so netlify.toml. It has a lot of the same power and flexibility that the web does, the web interface does, but you can use it again. If you want to keep your configuration local to your repository, you can absolutely do that. That's always an option for you. But here, for the simplicity's sake, we're going to do it through the web interface. And here's where we set that directory. So now we're going to go back to our site. Let's go back to master. And then I have to do a big pull. Now we're up to date with master. And we're going to look at some of the other things that Netlify lets us do. Netlify lets us have all these various commands. But the first thing that we're going to do is do a functions. And we're going to see a subcategory of commands for functions. And we see that we can create and build and invoke. So what we're going to do is we're going to create. And the first function we're going to create is hello world, which is where all good functions start, right? And we're going to show the rudiments of this framework for using functions. Now, another thing that's really cool about Netlify, and it was also cool about Gatsby, is this idea that all of the templates are themselves sort of pluggable and shareable. So it gives you a basic set of these templates, and then it gives you the option to maybe go get a template from elsewhere on the internet. But if you scroll through, we have a lot of different options, including doing node fetching for hitting other APIs. We can do OAuth. We can do send mail scripts. We can do cookie stuff or Slack or Stripe. A lot of stuff that people need. URL shorteners, these functions that just come out of the box with some defaults for you that you can then configure so you don't have to write everything completely from scratch. But let's start with the hello world. And it's now created that. So let's go into our code editor and kind of see what it gave us. So what it gave us is this functions folder. And it created inside of it one folder for hello world, which was the name of the function that we wanted to create. And inside of that, it created this hello world.js file. Okay. And in this hello world.js file, we're exporting a handler. And that handler is going to be an async, in this case, an async function that takes an event and a context. And this event is related to the request that was made. So here you can see that the subject, or this variable that it's trying to bring out, is the event.queryStringParameters.name. So we're expecting to call this function hello world with a name query string parameter. And then we're going to use that if it's given, and if not, we're going to say world. Okay? And then we are going to return a status code of 200. So this is very server-like stuff, right? So we can define all of our success codes. We can define all of our error codes, right? We can do whatever we want with a typical web server to respond to successes and errors. So status code 200 is success. Status code 500 is a server error. 404 not found. 400 is a bad request, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can use them precisely or not use them precisely. I would recommend that you use them precisely because a lot of people will depend on them meaning what those codes usually mean. But here we've encoded a body, so this is what's actually going to come back as a response from this API call. We're going to send back an object that says that has a message inside of it, and it says hello world or hello whatever they gave. And this is of note is we have to actually Json Stringify because what needs to go over the wire is actually a string. Otherwise, it's just going to come over the line as object object. If anybody's ever seen that before, just trying to like console log an object in a framework that doesn't support it, or just trying to output an object as a string doesn't always work. So we're going to actually stringify this object as JSON and send it over the wire so that the user gets it actually as what they expect. Okay, so we've created a function. Okay, great. What do we do with that function? Well, we have to find a place to actually call it. So let's go to our dad joke page, because here we have something which is sort of recurringly calling a button so that we can actually see some stuff here. And we have this get dad joke method, which is making this fetch request. Let's instead, let's do a try hello world, and we're going to do a fetch. We know we want to do a fetch, but we don't know where yet. So let's think about that for a second. And then let's do .then. We're going to get the response. We want to get the JSON. We want to encode the response as JSON. And then maybe we want to console log the response. And we can just see what we're getting out of it. Okay, so we know that this will make a fetch request to access that function, but how are we going to actually get access to that function? Well, we're going to get access to that function using the sort of custom or the sort of the canonical representation of these things. So /.netlify/functions. And this is all going to get translated and encoded to go to the correct places, be routed to the right places. But we can do .netlify/functions to get access to functions. And then we're going to do our hello world. All right. Now remember that we can do whatever we want here for as far as sending a query parameter. But let's start with just the basic. Okay. So now we have this basic request of try hello world, and we need to change maybe this button to not call get dad joke anymore, but to do get hello. Oh, wait, what did I call it? Try hello world. Okay, so we've sort of changed a little bit of the implementation of our Gatsby site just to try and hit this very basic endpoint that we've created. So, okay, great. So now we have some code that's going to try to call this function. We have the code for the function, but how are we going to actually access this? Do I actually have to deploy this? And for anybody that's ever had to do work with services, right, raising my hand here, you know that one of the more obnoxious things is if you don't have a way to test the services locally. So that you end up having to like deploy something to a special branch and then testing it. Oh gosh, that didn't work. So then you have to push more code and get it to build and wait another 15 minutes, another 20 minutes to do that. And it can be really obnoxious. The alternative is that you have to set up a really bespoke process to get the UIs running locally, or excuse me, the services running locally on your machine to go alongside your user interface. And that creates its own set of problems and complexities. This has always been a pain point for people that have to play in the realm of editing services and front end at the same time. But Netlify actually makes this super simple. Netlify gives us Netlify Dev. And Netlify Dev is actually going to not only run a development version of our build, but it's actually going to run a development version of the functions. So it's going to pretend like our functions are actually deployed and they're actually in the cloud, actually getting invoked, but that's not actually what's happening. So here is our website running in that sort of Netlify environment. So if we were doing an actual deployment, this is what Netlify thinks we would be deploying. And if we go to our dad joke section, here we are. And what we're going to see is when we click this button, we're hoping that we make a call to the server. And we did. So you can see we made a call out to this function, and it returned a 200 response, meaning success. We hope it means success. And it sent back hello world. Awesome. So let's go in here, and let's switch this up to be, I think it had to be name. And let's make it name is Rob. Can I say hi to me? Let's refresh this page. Look at this. Look. Hello, Rob. All right. So this is the most rudimentary, basic function that we can create, just an API that just responds. This is basically the API of the Netlify functions. And we can now extrapolate from here, right? It's sort of like, if you guys ever seen the how to draw an owl, it says like draw a circle, and then it says draw the rest of the owl. We can extract from this very simple function any other type of function that you want to build. Okay, so let's do another interesting one. And when I tried this out last night to make sure that it works, I was floored by what it actually creates. And it just lets you know that there are fathers everywhere in tech. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. So let's end that Netlify dev. And let's go back to our Netlify function. So remember, we can go to Netlify functions, create. Let's, when in doubt, just double check the documentation. Netlify functions, create, -- name. And here we're going to do dad jokes. So we're going to make a dad joke function. So instead of going to the API directly, let's say that we wanted to do some other processing. Let's say that we needed to, for whatever reason, we want to pass that through our functions, our cloud functions as a proxy, either because we want to do additional information, augment that with additional data, or because we just want the ability, the flexibility to someday change where we're getting our dad jokes from. And so that we don't want the UI to have to change when that happens. For whatever reason that you want to extrapolate the existing API out of the client app and into this function, you can do that. So we're going to set up a basic for this. Now, we can't use the hello world, or at least we can. We can start there and build whatever we want from there. But we need something a little bit more potent. We need the ability to make calls out to the internet to make that API call. And if we go scrolling through our list of options, we're eventually going to land at node fetch, which uses node fetch to hit external APIs without CORS issues. Perfect. That sounds like exactly what we want. So we're going to hit enter on that. Now it's created our dad joke. Now what's interesting here is that this actually has a dependency. So it also automatically created a package.json. Now, why did it automatically create a package.json? It automatically created a package.json because of that dependence and because of this idea that each of our functions should be self-contained. And if it's self-contained, then each of those packages needs to specify its own dependencies. This has some challenges, which we will see shortly when it comes time to deploy. But for the time being, this is why that is happening. So it's defining its dependencies in that package.json. If we go back in and we look at our functions now, we now have two folders, hello world, which is the one that we've already dealt with, and dad joke, which is using this model of using node fetch. So the dependency of node fetch is already generated here. And if we actually open up this file, lo and behold, I did not set this up. Their default implementation of a function on Netlify using node fetch uses the exact same dad joke API that we were already using in our application. Boom. That is no code right there, people. No code. That is the future of no code. You ask what you want, and the internet just delivers exactly what you were looking for. But let's look at a little bit of what it's doing here. So what it's doing here is making this async function again. And instead here, what it's doing is it's making a call using fetch out to this API. It's the same stuff we were doing in the front end, asking it for application JSON. And if it has an error, then it's going to respond with an error back to the user. So if that API fails for whatever reason, we're going to forward that error onto the client. But otherwise, we're going to get the JSON out of that response, and then we're going to respond with the actual joke that was sent back. Okay. So, but it's going to put it into a message object here. So now we're going to go to our front end, and we are going to do basically what we did here. And I'm going to remove this hello world now because we don't need it. And I'm going to replace this fetch with this Netlify function dad joke, and we don't need this header anymore, so we don't need any configuration here anymore. We're just using this basic thing. And here we're going to get the JSON out of it. And then we are going to get the joke, but it's not the joke anymore. Now, remember, we switched it. It's the message. So it's going to send that message and pull the message out of the response, and we're going to set that joke. So now I'm going to remove this hello world. We don't need to do that anymore. And I'm going to set this back to get dad joke. We basically restored the functionality, but we've now extracted the API call that we were making in the server side to making it inside of a Netlify function. Again, not adding a ton of value by itself, but certainly giving us something interesting. So I go back and I do Netlify dev. Okay, it's running. And now if I reload this page, you can see that it made a call out to dad joke, and it got it. And if I hit this again, it's making another call to dad joke and responding with that message. Okay, so this is the power of functions. You can make calls to APIs, you can do arbitrary data processing, but we can do more. So what if we want to add comments to our blog? So thus far, we've been doing this dad joke thing. Well, honestly, before we get to the comments, let's actually see if we can deploy this, because I'm always guilty of this. I do not commit often enough. So let's see what we have here. We have some new things here. We have dad joke. We have hello world. I thought we also had hello world. Maybe we've already deployed it. So we're going to do git add dot git status. OK, we've added, oh, there we go. There's hello world and there's dad joke. We've added them both. And then we're going to do git commit added basic functions. And we're going to do, what did I do, dash H again? Man, what do I want? Why am I thinking dash H today? Added basic functions. And then we're going to do a git push to master. This is going to trigger a deployment, and I'm expecting this deployment to fail because of a reason which we'll talk about briefly, but I'll let that build for a second. In the meantime, I'm going to start introducing what we're going to be doing next, which is we're going to be doing messages. Now, to do messages on our blogs, we need to actually have a database. And when you look at database integrations with Netlify, so if I go to Netlify functions, create dash name log comments, post comments. When we look at the options here, you can do GraphQL with Apollo, you can do Hasura, you can do a bunch of different database connections. But interestingly enough, we have as one of our options Fauna. And interestingly enough, Fauna is offering us a free tier as one of the sponsors of this. Now, this is not sponsored content, but when I was looking at options to just get a quick database up and running so that I could test this, I noticed that we had Fauna and I had access to a free tier offer. So I said, I'm going to try it. So that's ultimately what I did. So we're going to integrate with FaunaDB for the purposes of updating our comments. But honestly, there's going to be nothing here that's particularly super beholden to exactly what Fauna is doing. There's versions of this for anybody, for any provider. This has an additional optional script. Sure, go ahead and run it. Okay, now let's go see how our deployment went. Our deploy works. Wow, everything is working today. All this stuff that didn't work in test suddenly works in production. Well, let's double check to make sure everything's working. Bad joke. And oh, it's not working. Click for dad joke. Okay, yeah, it's not working. So it's not working, and it's just kind of interesting. It's not working because you can see it says cannot find module node fetch. So what's happening here? What is the challenge here? And honestly, I wasn't able to find a better answer for this. I talked to a couple people about it. But the problem with this is that we have these dad jokes needs this package JSON. This package JSON needs to actually be installed to get access to the node fetch module that you need. It's not doing that as part of our normal build command, because remember, when you do a build execution in Netlify, it expects it to be completely self-contained. It wants you to do nothing else but execute that command in its own sort of sterile environment. And as such, it doesn't bring to the table anything, any additional knowledge of anything else. It can only do the command that you gave it. That command is a Gatsby build. It also does a top-level npm install, but that top-level npm install or yarn install, yarn whatever, is not going to pull in all the sub things. So in order to make this work, we either have to bring the requirement or the necessity for the node modules, so we need to bring in node fetch to the top-level package JSON, which will make it available, or we have to adapt our build script to actually do an npm install ahead of time. So what we're going to do here, and that's what I'm going to do here. So we're going to do go into functions and into dad joke, and then we're going to do an npm build or an npm install, excuse me, and then we're going to run Gatsby build. Okay, so I don't know if I have to go back out, but just in case I do, and Gatsby build. So what we're going to do is we're going to dip into the dad joke function, npm install it quick, jump back out, and run a Gatsby build. I'm doing that in place of putting this thing at the top level. Your mileage may vary. This is weird that this is actually something that we need to worry about, but for now, I couldn't see a way around it either in the documentation or by talking to people. Maybe they're working on fixing it, but regardless, we're going to do that, which is going to change this. So we are going to, oh no, git add package JSON. Git commit, did I fix the build? -h. Oh, people are supposed to be peer reviewing this, repair programming on this. Okay, and then we're going to git push that to master, and hopefully that will fix the build. While that build is executing, I'm going to show you a little bit. So when I went to FaunaDB and I signed up for my account, I got access to this UI. It's a document store database. So I made a new collection called post comments, and the data model for this is just the objects have a post and the text of the comment, and that's how we're going to find things. So furthermore, I made an index here of post comments by slug. So all I did was I said go to post comments, the index name I gave post comments, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't matter. And then here I said that it was data.post. So I'm making the queryable index the post. And I'm doing this because I want to get the comments for a particular post. So I want the index to be able to return me that information. So that's what I did. I'm going through this part a little bit quick because this is not about Fauna. But I just want to show you what I did so that you understand that you could do this too if you're following along. It's pretty straightforward to sign up for an account and build this collection. And if I test it here by doing my first post, which is one of our posts, you can see I have 4 comments. And if I do my second post, I have 2 comments. So this is the database that we're going to be accessing. And let's see what we have here. So that, I think, worked. So we have over here our site, not the local site, this site, dad joke. And now it's working again. OK, so that install helped us solve that problem. So let's look now with that post comments thing. We used the starter for FaunaDB. And what did it make? Well, it kind of made a lot. And I know this is a bit overwhelming to look at. And that's OK. But here's what we want to know, right? It's documented decently well to kind of tell you what each of these sections does. In our requirement, we want to be able to add comments, and we want to be able to fetch comments. So to fetch comments, I need a get. And to make comments, generally speaking, we're going to do a post. I'm not going to let people edit comments because I would have to attribute those comments to individual users, and we're not going to do authentication. And I'm not going to let users delete for the same reason. So I'm just going to come in, and I'm going to remove the post and the delete sections. So I'm just trimming the default values that it gave me, and I'm going to get rid of delete over here. You don't have to get rid of these files over here. It's not going to hurt anything to keep them, but just for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to remove them. And then we have this get. So it gives us the ability to get all things, and then it gives us the ability to get a particular thing. Now, I want to use something that looks a little bit like this. Because what I want to have happen is I want people to give me a post ID, and then I'm going to return the comments for that post. So it turns out that I don't need this side of this get at all. But I do want this handler, because the code in the read all handler is a little bit more akin to what I want. you wouldn't know this, and that's okay if you don't. You'll see what we did when we get into it. So I've now edited this default file that it's created. This is the handler. Remember, the handler is the entry point to your functions. And it's going to break up the request, and it's going to pass on the segments, particularly the ID, this piece at the very end of the URL, and pass that into this file, the read-all file. Now, the read-all file is these ones over here on the right. So now, when I'm done trimming, I have this create schema, which you actually also don't need, at least not for what we're going to do. And then create, post comments, and read all. So for the create, we pretty much have what we have. It's going to pull in a server secret from our environment. And then it's going to go into this. Now, we didn't call this items. We called this post comments. So we're going to change this to be post comments. And it's going to pull that out, and it's going to take the item out of the thing, and it's going to send it back over the wire. More or less, that's what we need. And the data that's coming from the server is going to be the data that we put in. So, you can do better API management, data management here, be more defensive in our coding. But for the purposes of this demo, this is going to be sufficient. For read all, we need to change this to be, again, this is in the details of Fauna more so than what we're talking about. So I'm going to be moving through this a little fast, where what I want to do is a different index. That index that I want is actually the post comments by slug. And I'm going to match it on the event.id. So the event.id is what's being passed in to this handler. And that came from this. It was passing it into event.id is this ID at the end, and it's passing that in. So I have access to that. So I'm going to say, basically, give me all the comments for posts that match the given one that I gave you, and then return that data back. So again, this code is complex. I'll give you that, but this code is complex because it's interfacing with a complex system, a database. This code is specifically complex because of that part. It's as complex as any other database that we'd have to access. I would argue that this is actually pretty straightforward for accessing a database. If anybody's had to access a database from JavaScript before, this is actually pretty straightforward as far as that goes, but I understand that this is a little intimidating to take in all at once. Suffice it to say that this function is simply giving us access to this FaunaDB. Okay, so we have that, and we have our functions set up. So now we actually need to get access to it. And to do that, we are going to go into our template for our blog post. And inside here, we're going to add a new section, which is going to have an H3, which says comments. And then we are going to need some data. So what do we need? We need comments. And for that, we're going to use React use state and give it that. And so here we go. That's our comments. So we're going to say comments.map. Each comment, we're going to turn that into just a p tag. The key is here, and the comment is the comment. Okay. So that is where we're going to put our comments. But of course, this comments is empty by default, so we actually then need to make a function, which is get comments. And that is going to take, let's see. I'm cheating. Over here, we need to do a fetch of something. And then we need to take the response and get the JSON version of the response. And then you wouldn't know this off the top of your head, but just to save us a little bit of time, what's going to come back in the comments is we want to set the comments to some value, right? But what is that value? It's comments.map. And each of the array elements that's coming back from the API is going to be nested in this way. So it's comment, data, comment. So there's going to be data in the comment, and there's going to be a comment property of that data. Now, comment, data, comment, I get is a bit confusing, but it's just the way things are unfortunately named. for now. And then if there's no response from the server, we'll just use an empty array. So we've created a method that actually goes out and gets information from, gets comments for this blog post. But what is going to be this address? Well, remember that it's at least at a baseline, just .netlify/functions/post comments. And then we need to pass in an ID. Now, what is that ID going to be? We need some ID to identify it. And what we're going to do is actually go to our blogs themselves and try and see if there's a piece of data in the metadata we can use. Now, the path is pretty close, but we want something smaller than the path. So I'm going to just say that we're going to create a slug. And that slug is just going to be this part. Now, there's no magic to the name slug. We can use literally any property we want. But I'm going to put this here. So now we've added this slug property. And now what we want to do is come down here, and because we've added now a slug to our front matter, we can actually get access to it here. Because we can get access to it here, we can actually get access to it in here. And so that means that we can actually make this front matter.slug. So that's where we want to go, is to get these comments from this function. Okay? So let's try that and see if we got it right on the first try. So now we're going to run this. We're going to go to our blogs, and we're going to go to our first blog. And comments didn't load. It didn't load because nothing is calling get comments. So then I need a react.useEffect to start us off. And here I want to do get comments. I want to do this once. Now it's going to complain about that. We'll put up with it. OK, so now if I close this and I reload, there's my comments. So these comments are actually being surfaced from the database, right, through our Netlify function into our code on our front end. So I know we're slightly nearing our end, but I really want to show this. So the last piece that I want to do is I want to show us adding a comment. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an input of type text. And that's fine. And then I want to put a button of type submit here. Say submit comment. And here I want to do on submit equals submit form. And here I know I'm going to bind to a value here. So I'm going to say that this is going to be the value new comment. And oops, sorry. Not correct. So these methods take that, and I'm passing that event. And then here I need to do an on change. So this is a controlled form in React, if you're not familiar. Basically, we're going to be keeping track of this form value and connecting into its innards to control what it does. So here we're going to set new comment event.target.value. That's how we get the value out of the input. And the last piece here is going to use another piece of state. That state is going to be new comment and set new comment. And that's going to be what the user's typing. Okay. So we know we need one more function, and this is going to be post comment. And post comment is going to this isn't going to be. This is going to be the submit form handler. Just going to take an event, and one of the things that we're going to want to do is actually stop the default behavior of the form, because that'll cause the page to refresh. We don't want that. And we are going to hit this same ID, but what we're going to do is we're not going to hit this endpoint, but we're going to hit this endpoint, and then we're going to pass in a new method. So by default, it uses get. So we're going to use a post because we want to create something new. We actually don't need this stuff. But what's the other thing that we need to do? We need to set the body. And the body is going to be a Json Stringify of this object, which is going to be a post, which is the front matter slug, right? That's the ID of the page. Same thing that we're pulling it from up here. And then the comment is going to be new comment. So we're basically saying that we want to post a new comment with the text that the user has entered, and then we want to put it with this ID. Now, one other thing that we can do here is we can actually then respond when we return from this value. When we actually successfully save this, we can then do a set new comment of empty, meaning it's going to clear the comment. And then we can call get comments so that we can actually also see the comment that we've added and any other users have added in the meantime. So we've added this submit form. So if we Okay. That should be updated. So now we see our page. And what we should see when we link this is this on? If we hit enter, you can see that the comment went out to the database and then was fetched again. And if we come here, we see is this on? So hopefully what you all have seen by doing this is that there wasn't a lot of heavy lifting here. Now, this database connection was probably the most complicated thing, but it was just to show you that you can spin up a Gatsby site and use Gatsby plugins, as we did last week, to build a really cool site very quickly. Then connect that Gatsby site up with Netlify to get it immediately deployed to CDNs around the globe so that people can access it, and then build functions that connect your website dynamically with data sources, with APIs, with whatever other information that you need in order to drive the guts and the innards of your site. You can connect it with authentication, you can connect it with the A/B testing. You can do all of that. And that is really the magic and the promise of this Jamstack ideas. This idea is that your website are built from statically generated content, instantly deployed to CDN networks, and that all of your dynamic functionality is bounded by these APIs. So the J for JavaScript, that's your dynamic client-side information or behavior. The A for APIs, meaning that all of that additional information or data that you need is being exposed to your user interface through APIs, which are then instantiated in the cloud or wherever that it needs to get them. And then the M for markup, which is just a way that we're going to represent our websites. So I know this was a lot to take in, certainly a lot to do in an hour, but hopefully you've seen just how much you can actually get done. I hope you do try this, that you do try to spin up your own Gatsby website or your own website of any type. Take a side project you already have, get it integrated with Netlify, get it building on every Git commit, and share those links with people. Share those links with me about the cool stuff that you're building. Share those links with others. You no longer have to be scared of deployments. You no longer have to be scared of what it means to get something live or to maintain it or to have to worry about server upkeep or updating dependencies and things like that. Allow Netlify to make your life a lot simpler in that way. So that is it for this week's training. But as I close out for this track, again, if you're looking for any corporate trainings like this one or other ones in the future, or are there similar types of ones, if you like what you see here, contact us today at hi@this.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. And the conversation doesn't have to stop here. Again, I'm at RoboCell with one extra L, so RoboCell on Twitter. Reach out to me, ask me any questions that you might have, engage, and certainly be here for the rest of the training. So we have a bunch of cool trainings today talking about PWAs in Angular, PWAs in Vue, and our performance, and then an RxJS talk later. So we're going to be doing this all day. So definitely go get a snack, go stretch your legs. We'll meet you guys back here in about 20 minutes. Thank you.